Episode 127 of the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. And today, Sid, we've got Will Hutch joining the conversation. Will's an author and youth worker communicator. He's been doing some work on students that are experiencing anxiety and despair. And this is a really helpful conversation. You know, the heartbeat behind the podcast, we know, has been to give youth workers, frontline youth workers, practical next steps, ideas, answers to questions that they're wrestling with. And this one certainly does just that.
Yeah, you know what, Jer, like things that we know to be true about the value of relationships and the role that they can play in helping kids flourish. We just intuitively know that, and he's speaking to that reality, and I think it's really encouraging for us, especially for you who are a volunteer. If you're a volunteer youth worker, you just need to know that what you do matters so much. You are most often in the most important relational role, and I think this podcast is going to help affirm you and give you a little bit of direction with that. You know, Jer, speaking about the value of relationships, one of the things that I love about our sponsorship that we have, our partnership we have with Chinwe Western University, is they so value community. And I know that many of the young leaders that we work with, that my wife works with at her camp, they see young adults who have been through Trinity Western University, and they have great community, they have great leadership development skills, and they're very good at working with other people. So, hey, listen, if you have a student that's in your ministry, they're looking to go into post-secondary school, we think that you should look at Trinity Western University. They prepare you for living a faithful life in all sorts of work environments, but more importantly than that, they prepare you as a human being to actually live a flourishing life, and we love the work they do. We love our partnership with them.
That's great. All right, let's jump into today's conversation with Will Hutch.
Welcome to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Youth ministries rise and fall on the volunteers. So we are here to encourage and equip you. Join the conversation as we tackle the practical questions you are asking so you can help the next generation know Jesus.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined today by Will Hutch, joining from Southern Florida. How are you doing today, Will?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, it's so wonderful that we've gotten a chance to chat and got to know each other just a little bit, and really looking forward to what you have written about and what we're going to get a chance to talk about today. But just so that people understand a little bit where you're coming from, why don't you fill us in on a bit of who you are, a little bit about where you're at in Southern Florida, what you do, and then we'll chat about this great book.
So I've been a next-gen youth pastor for about 15 years. And about 3 years ago, I set off on a journey to start a nonprofit to help with mental health issues, specifically in schools and churches, and to really kind of create a bridge between, faith and mental health. Like, how do we take these best practices of understanding our brain, but also understand that we have powerful spiritual tools, and we have Jesus, is the ultimate, ultimate healer. But how do we as the body of Christ and as those who are helping the next generation, how do we kind of learn and gain understanding of how our brains are wired, and how do we help kids to heal, specifically when they're experiencing despair and anxiety? So that's kind of the journey I've been on for the last 3 or 4 years, really doing my best to help equip us as youth leaders and youth workers to just have a better understanding of our minds.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And so you've been doing this for over 15 years, you would say. Have you noticed in your ministry time, what are the changes that have happened kind of as we think about mental health in teenagers? It seems like people maybe are more open to the conversation.
Yeah.
Like, what's it been like for you on the front lines?
Well, if you've been in youth ministry, 15 plus years. So some people who are listening, they may have been, you might be like, I've been a small group leader for 20 years. Well, 20 years ago, it was all about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? I mean, that's what we were preaching. We were really trying to reduce, risk and just kind of keep students just heading in a good, positive direction. But I would say as a youth pastor, I saw a shift probably starting in 2012, 2013, where I started seeing more issues of self-harm, cutting, started seeing more issues of just high anxiety and despair. But over time, it concerned me at first. I would say over time, it really started to alarm me, where more and more I was having more students come and talk to me about the anxiety that they were feeling or depression that they were kind of diagnosing themselves with. And parents then were coming into my office and they're like, hey, how do I help my kid? And I felt as a youth worker, I felt a little limited. Like I knew I had powerful spiritual tools, and we did pray. We prayed, we fasted, we read scripture, we spoke truth. But at the same time, like these parents were like, no, I get that. I've done all of that. Like I've prayed, I've cried myself to sleep for my kid. I'm really worried about them. What else can I do? And at the time, like the best answer just seemed to be, well, counseling. But then as we started to partner with Christian counselors as a church, we found that the wait lists were really long and some families had affordability issues. So it just had me feeling a little stuck as a youth leader, like just not sure, how do I help these kids that are really dealing with these pressures in life? And yes, we need counselors, and at times we need medicine. Yes, we need spiritual tools. Like we need all of this, but it just made me kind of go on this journey of saying, what can we as caring adults do to help promote healing when a kid is experiencing anxiety and despair? And that's really what the book Seen came out of. It came out of a lot of conversations, and specifically conversations with Dr. Chinwe Williams, who is a licensed mental health counselor. She would say she's a Jesus person too. She is just an amazing person. And from those conversations with mental health counselors, Chinwe and I kind of dug into the research and asked the question, okay, how do we help caring adults? How do we help small group leaders, mentors, youth workers? How do we help them to help kids when they're experiencing anxiety and despair? And so
help me understand a little bit of just the terminology here, because I know one of the things that's happened perhaps over the last number of years is that as people talk more about this, anxiety, depression, in some ways these are clinical terms, but they're also used interchangeably for some of the things that, teenagers are just experiencing when they have a bad day. And so talk to us about, and then you use the term despair as well. Can you just kind of set up a little bit of the terminology of what you're seeing students facing? And is there a distinction between, as you think about, we're discussing with this book, is there a distinction between clinical diagnosis and the general hard days that people have?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I think as youth workers, the diagnosis doesn't matter as much to our conversation. And what I mean by that is sometimes I think as parents, youth workers, we feel this pressure of like, man, I got to diagnose this kid right. Well, we're not mental health professionals. Like you don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to be a therapist. Because at the end of the day, whether or not there's a clinical depression that a kid is experiencing, or even just a situational despair, or just a blue day, honestly, the response and how we help influence healing in the brain is exactly the same. Whether or not it's an actual anxiety disorder or just a really hard season with some anxiety and stress, again, the brain responds in the same way. Now, sometimes the brain kind of gets stuck in a specific flow. Like sometimes it can kind of, you get in that low place and it kind of stays there, or it gets in that really high anxious place and it stays there. And that's what, again, whether it's short term or long term, the response as caring adults is ultimately the same, because what happens in the brain is actually pretty predictable. So if I can give you a little science lesson real quick.
Yeah, we want to know, because this is the cool part. So we're referencing this book, and we'll link it, of course, in the show notes so that people can know that Seen is a new release. I guess it came out a couple months ago. Is that right?
Yeah, about a month ago. Yeah, just over a month ago.
And so we want people to be able to access that resource. But you've done like the digging, and you're a co-author with a PhD. Like this is not. There's a lot of science behind this. I guess is what I'm trying to get at. So fill us in on what you've learned as you were kind of writing this out.
Yeah, and the cool thing about this is like, science. Sometimes people think science and faith are working against each other, and I actually think oftentimes science is confirming what biblical principles. And this is that's true in this case, that our brains, God wired and created our brains in a unique way, and our brains do predictable things when we experience stress. And so you have two parts of your brain. So you have a right side of your brain and a left side of your brain. Now, there's a lot of parts to your brain, but we're going to simplify this just to these two hemispheres. And the right side of your brain is predominantly where your emotional processing takes place. This is also where your fight, flight, or freeze processes take place. And the left side of your brain is where predominantly your logical processing takes place. And so in a healthy functioning brain, you feel an emotion, you logically process it, and vice versa. Things kind of go back and forth. The problem is that when we experience high stress over time, cortisol, stress hormone, you've probably heard of it before, kind of drips. And over time, too much cortisol can kind of flood the brain. It creates this reaction in the brain and it overactivates the right side. And it kind of it doesn't create a biological despairing, but in some ways it does. There's almost this detachment between the right side and the left side of the brain, where the reason why we like to use the word despair is because despair is really the ultimate root of the problem, right? A level of hopelessness over time. But despair is like a dispairing of the two sides of the brain. So think of despair as a dispair between emotional and logical processing. And this can be really, really hard for someone to face. Oftentimes when a kid is experiencing despair, again, whether it's long-term despair or even situational despair, if you ask them how they feel, oftentimes they'll say, I don't know. Or they may even say, I feel numb. How many of us have heard that response? And what that tells us is it tells us that there's kind of a detachment between the emotional processing and the logical processing, because we need our logical processing in order to put our emotions into words. And when we're in despair, we just simply can't do it. Now, despair and anxiety kind of do the same thing. So anxiety does the same thing, by the way. It creates that detachment because the emotional side of the brain elevates. What anxiety is doing is you get all this emotional cortisol levels high in the right side of the brain. And what the kid hears, or you, if you're experiencing anxiety, what your brain is saying is, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe, you're not safe, So it's like this alarm constantly going off. And that's what kind of creates this underlying anxiety. It's like this kind of silent alarm that's always there. But again, when that's happening, whether consciously or not, when that's happening, the logical processing tends to decrease. But here's the cool thing. So in the same way that we know the brain responds to anxiety and despair, the brain also responds in predictable ways to love and empathy. In fact, in powerful ways, even when we're in despair or facing high anxiety, that love and empathy, research shows us love and empathy has the ability to help re-engage the logical processing and to decrease some of that emotional energy. So oxytocin, another hormone that you may have heard of, is involved with emotional bonding and specifically with attachment. And there's a lot of research that shows us that when a kid feels seen and they feel healthy attachment, it can actually help reroute the brain back to feeling safe in early childhood and decrease despair. And over time, love and empathy has the ability to kind of reroute some of these brain processes, decrease anxiety and despair, and bring the brain back to a whole functioning process. So that's really good news. And it's not a one and done. I don't want to oversell the idea that, wow, you with just one word can change a kid's life. Yes, it will matter, but we definitely need to think of this as a wraparound approach. But all that to say, and here's why this is good news. What it means is that every caring adult actually can do something and be a part of the solution. Every caring adult can be a part of promoting healing when a kid is experiencing despair and anxiety. And that's really good news.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the idea that, again, you're saying it's backed up. Do you guys have like all the footnotes in the book on the studies or the science behind this attachment kind of fixing some of these things?
Yeah, we have tons of research in the book that point back to a lot of these studies.
So I kind of want to know, because you're coming from youth worker world, so similar, obviously, to my background. How was it getting into the weeds of like the whole field, the whole research field, and all that kind of stuff? Was that your contribution to the book? Did you rely on a few other people? How did that go?
Yeah, definitely. I relied on a lot of people that were smarter than me. But honestly, there was a little bit of an interest, I would say. I desire to know a little bit of how has God wired us? How has he created us? And, I actually studied psychology in college. It was one of my majors, and then I changed it to communications, and, it kind of went on my way. But so there was also an interest too of like understanding the mind and behavior and how we're wired. So I think going back and kind of diving into this research, it was a little, again, writing a book is a lot of work, but it was a little easier because there was a little bit of a passion there and a desire to really kind of dig this up and figure out, hey, how can we empower caring adults with simple solutions?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so fill us in then, because we got youth workers listening. They've got the teenagers. They know I've got this particular kid. They struggle with some type of despair, some type of anxiety, and you're telling me that I can change their brain by the things that I do. So what should we have our youth workers be doing? And then would love for you, secondly, to also give some ideas for parents, because, oftentimes as youth workers, we get a chance to encourage parents in some of these ways too. So if we're on the front lines, we got a small group, we got a kid who we're thinking about, what can we do to be helpful for them?
So I'm going to make this really, really simple. And, I'm just going to give you a couple quick points. And I would encourage you to pick up the book Scene, where you can kind of take a deeper dive into this. But for the sake of time, I want to give you something you could just apply this week. Because as you said, a lot of this is based on research. The problem is unless you're an academic type person, and you mentioned this, like the research can be a little like heavy and like, how do I apply this? Well, that's what Dr. Chinwe and I did. We pretty much took the research and we said, okay, let's simplify this so the normal youth worker can put it into everyday practice and know that what they're doing actually matters and it's research backed. So the first one is this. All right. This is super simple. This is going to be almost too simple to even matter. But to show up, to simply show up. Showing up is like 50% of the work, believe it or not. And consistency matters in this. If in fact consistency, showing up with a caring adult consistently is such a huge thing, that it's one of the key elements in building resilience in the next generation. That's why we say it's like 50% of the work. So consistency matters. So show up before they ask you to, and show up undistracted, like be fully present. I remember learning this early on as a youth pastor. I had a student who their dad died unexpectedly, passed away unexpectedly. And it was 2:00 in the morning. I got the call. So I get in my car and I'm driving. I pick up their small group leader on the way. And on the way, I was thinking about the verses that I needed to say, and I was trying to figure out what to say. Well, the small group leader who I picked up was a fire chief. And so he had done a lot of these kind of late night phone calls and going to just be with people. And I remember, I was in my 20s. I remember he just looked at me and he goes, "Will, in moments like this, you don't need to say anything. You just simply need to show up." And then he said this, it stuck with me. He said, it's called the ministry of presence. Just your presence matters, right? And I realized, I'm like, man, that's so true. And it took the pressure off of me of like, at times of crisis, sometimes we think we have to come in and say something, but honestly, sometimes all we have to do is just show up because our presence matters. When we show up, love is a result, right? That's what they feel. They feel love with presence when we simply show up. So show up is a really, really easy one.
Yeah. So show up, and you mean like show up to like the program nights that we've committed to, or show up to like a specific place? What do you mean by show up, or where are we showing up to?
Yeah, showing up obviously with the scheduled time that you already have. That's the easiest way. But showing up even unexpectedly, showing up at games. I mean, we're still in a pandemic world, so maybe not right now, but showing up to, football games and soccer games and dance recitals and, all those things.
I'd love for you to give our youth workers an idea, because sometimes, so I'm a huge fan of that. And obviously I've been a point leader in a number of different spaces. So I know the value of like the safety that comes from knowing your small group leader is going to be there. You're going to go, sometimes teenagers are flaky. So sometimes they're not going to show up, but when they show up, when they actually arrive at the program, that there's that consistent leader that's going to be there for them. Yeah. But we know sometimes things come up in our volunteers world. So, people that are listening, they're like, yeah, but I have vacation, or I get sick. Is there a way to make sure that even when you can't be there, that you're not degrading the safety that you've developed in the life of those kids by your consistent presence? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think, every church has a different, kind of policy in terms of how adults communicate with minors. And so if your church has an ability for you to communicate with students via electronic, like, text or some type of messaging system, that's always a great way, like just kind of popping in, and even like, Monday mornings, shooting them a text and saying, "Hey, I'm praying for you. I'm thinking about you. How can I pray for you today?" Or, "Hey, I remembered you're having a test today. I just want you to know you're going to kill it. You got this," right? Like, so showing up in those little ways really, can matter. I would talk to, your church leadership about, what that looks like for you specifically.
And I think too, even just to say, like, if there's a way to let students know if you're not going to be, like, if they kind of expect you to be somewhere, I'm assuming it'd be good for them to know if you're not going to be there, so they're not shocked when they arrive and they get that like sinking feeling. I just know, even from I'm learning this as like a dad, and you kind of get this too because I know you got kids, but I've got a 6-year-old, and like if things aren't as he predicted at you know, the environment, like all of a sudden he gets, you know, he's anxious, he gets nervous, you know, things change, and it can be just as small as like the person I was expecting to see there isn't there, and all of a sudden he's on alert and it's fight or flight. And so if you can lower that kind of response, I'm guessing is probably pretty helpful.
Yeah, and every kid is different. So if you know that about, you know, some of your teenagers, that they like to have all their I's dotted and T's crossed, like maybe giving them at least a heads up is always helpful. Some kids are kind of wired that way.
Yeah. Okay, so we're helping teens rewire some of the disparity that they might experience in their brain. Showing up builds, that's one thing, so I love that. What are other things that you would say, the practical things that youth leaders can do to help these kids kind of heal some of that disparity?
So I'm going to give you one more that's just super, super simple. And it's to simply see them. But I don't mean to see them in the sense of like see them physically. What I mean by this is see beyond the behavior, to see the emotion. See beyond the behavior and see the emotion. Let me explain it this way. Like oftentimes when we have a kid that's like upset, let's say that, Jeremy, you know, you're in a small group and, you know, Jimmy comes up to you and Jimmy's upset. He's failed his test, you know, and Jimmy's like, can't believe I failed my test today. You know, the teacher did this, because they always blame the teacher, right? And Jimmy goes on and, you know, blaming the teacher. And what you want to do as an adult, you want to say, Jimmy, you failed your test? Yeah, of course you failed your test. I'm like, you're always talking about how you're on Xbox Live. I know your mom's been riding you about studying and you're not doing it. And, you know, John told me that you guys were playing on Xbox till 1 a.m. So I'm not surprised that you failed your test. Like, if you want to not fail your test, do better, Jimmy, right? I mean, that's what we want to do. The problem is that when we have an emotionally activated teenager, so right brain activated, upset, frustrated, angry, maybe even disappointed, but we meet them with left brain logic, what happens is we kind of fly right by them. We miss them. And what they interpret and what they feel is they say, I just don't, you're not understanding me. You don't get me. In fact, we maybe even had a teenager say something like, you just don't understand, right? What they're really saying is like, you're not seeing me. You're not seeing beyond what I'm really saying. Like, see the emotion. And so what I would encourage small group leaders to do and youth workers to do is, yes, because at the end of the day, we can't just all stay in our feels and never talk about like getting better, right? And going forward. So yes, that's where we're going, but don't start there. When you see a right brain activated kid, meet right brain with right brain. Meet emotion with emotion first. This is powerful because it's empathy, really. It's when we choose to meet people with empathy first, then we'll be able to direct them logically. I like to say it this way, that we have to win the heart before we can lead the mind. We have to win the heart before we can lead the mind. So meet right brain with right brain. Here's what that would look like, Jeremy, for you. Like, so let's say Jimmy comes up and he's like, man, I failed my test. Can't believe this teacher did this and blah, blah, blah. And you just simply go, oh, Jimmy, you failed your test? Yeah, I failed my test. Man, I'm so sorry. Hey, sit down. Sit down. Tell me about it. Oh man, I'm sorry you failed your test. You must feel really disappointed. Yeah, I am disappointed, you know? And he just starts talking, you know, starts blaming everybody else, but taking his own responsibility, right? You know, and you're having all of those thoughts. Just keep them in the back of your head. All the logical thoughts, all the things that you're hearing him say that are irrational, just keep them in the back of your head for a minute and just meet the emotion. And even like, this could be a helpful tool for you. You could even say, you know, I can imagine if I failed my test, I would feel pretty disappointed too, right? That's empathy. That's recognizing like, you know what? Yeah, Jimmy is definitely not doing the right thing here. But if I was in his shoes and I failed my test, I'd probably feel exactly the same way he's feeling. So say that, like actually meet the emotion with emotion, meet right brain with right brain. And then when you do that, when you allow this kind of emotional processing to kind of process out, what it does is it decreases the energy on the right side of the brain. It re-engages left brain logic. Then you're able to kind of direct them logically and kind of, ask questions like, hey, Jimmy, do you think there's anything you can do next time to get a different result? Or do you think there's anything you could do to maybe talk to the teacher about a retest? Like, what do you think, so you could kind of go into logical processing, but first meet right brain with right brain, then meet left brain with left brain.
Yeah. Okay. This is super helpful. Obviously, there's lots more that we want people to grab the book. There's lots of extra details in there. Will, as we are kind of coming in for a bit of a landing here, I would love for you to think about what are ways that we can support families and parents, because we've got kids that are very emotional. I've got this despair. We notice maybe there's some anxiety, some depression. And we should clarify too, obviously, if there is a need for like actual clinical follow-up, if there's a clinical diagnosis here, that's in the realm of experts. We want to refer. We can continue to refer to counseling. But if we were to encourage parents that are kind of wrestling through with this stuff, what's something that, you've been able to discover could be helpful?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, as youth workers, some of the problems that we'll see in a teenager, we know it's stemming from some issues and things at home, right? Some of the despair or anxiety, maybe even the pressure of performance, we know is really coming from a parent. And I think as youth workers, the tendency for us is over time to almost vilify parents, almost put them in this place of like, it's us and them, and we're trying to save their kid and they're trying to destroy their kid, and we'll never say that out loud. But I think in our head, if we really like get quiet and listen to what we're really feeling, at times I think we can get to that place. And so I just want to pause and just remind us that I've never met a parent that didn't love their kid. Never met a parent that didn't love their kid deeply, even. I'm sure maybe they exist, but I've never met one. Even the parents that I've known who were addicted to drugs, they still love their kids, and the parents that were far from Jesus, they still love their kids. Like they love their kids a lot and they would do anything for them, but they don't always know the best way and they don't always know how to help their kids, but they love their kids. They do love their kids. And so I think if we can keep that perspective as we engage with parents and remember that they love this kid more than I do. And I know they're frustrated. You also have to remember sometimes parents are in their own stress cycle and kind of their own trauma as well. So they may be experiencing this despairing of right brain and left brain, detachment. So you have to recognize that too and help meet right brain with a parent, like see their emotion when they're, really activated, because chances are if their kid's going through a hard time, they're going through a hard time too, because it's hurting. They deeply love their kid and they're scared. They're frustrated. They're fearful, So I think the best way that we can partner with parents is honestly just to first remember that and then, help steer them, encourage them. Brag on their kid in front of them. But then if you get that relational equity and you have the opportunity to kind of speak into making some suggestions or referring them to counseling for more, deeper issues or issues that just kind of are consistently trending, then absolutely use that to the best of your ability.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Okay, so this is great. We got a couple practical things, some ideas, ways to process help with parents. Any last words, things that you would want us to know as frontline youth workers working with students who are experiencing despair and depression and anxiety?
Last thing I would say, what you do really matters. And if you're working with middle school students, you might not think that all the time because you don't always see it. You don't always see the results. They don't always give you the affirmation back. But I want you to know it really, really, really matters. Just simply showing up actually matters. That ministry of presence actually matters. When you see a kid, you see their heart, you see beyond the behavior, you speak to their potential, you speak life into their soul. All of that actually matters in a big way. And you're building seeds that are building these like little deposits of resilience that, yes, are going to, I believe, create a great foundation for a strong faith, but also create strong character to be able to overcome life's challenges. So never underestimate your importance. What you do matters. If you're choosing to see a kid and listen to them on a weekly basis, in my mind, you are a superhero. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right. Well, let's tell everybody, where can they find you online? Where can they find the book so that we can get that shipped out to our listeners all around the world? What's the best way to access it?
So the Scene book, the Scene, SEEN book.com. You could also follow me on Instagram. It's at Will Hutch, really easy. And you could also find the Scene book stuff there as well.
Awesome. We'll link that stuff in the show notes so people can access that, and really appreciate your time. Thanks so much to you and to your co-author, Chinwe, for taking the time to write this out to youth workers. It's certainly a gift to the community, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks.